All right, Cal, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So, as Eric said, I'm Cal Sexsmith. I live in just outside of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. 10 points if you can spell either one of those. And I'm also on the board of directors of the Layout Design SIG. This clinic has been bouncing around in my head for several years, even with the thought of maybe it would make either as an article or as a clinic. So my experience with trying to host an operating session goes back to about 1990, about 2 layouts ago. And I came up with this very complex and elaborate operating scheme. I invited over a bunch of guys. Some of them had seen the layout before and had run trains on it, but we'd never operated it. After about an hour, things are so badly plugged up that we had to end at that point. And so I started simplifying, and it probably took us about 1.5 years before we actually got to the point where we actually had a successful session. So when it came time for the next layout, I moved in 2001, and of course it took a while after the move to get a layout design and get it built to the point. So actually that it was at a much earlier point in the layout, and I decided that would start operating in a much more simple manner. I did a few solo sessions myself first, and I said, okay, I think I can do things, and I called it the 3-way freight solution, because basically we just got together and we ran 3-way freights. Okay, so there we go. So as they say, operate early, operate often. And it's best if operations can be introduced at an early stage. They can be solo operations if not enough track is in place to support multiple operators. It'll validate your operation scheme or not. It will identify reliability issues, and it will help train the crews. So we'll talk a little bit about the layout. So again, this is a former layout, and this is the scheme that we used to get started operating on it. So construction began in 2003, operated from early 2008 to early 2010. Actually, I think it was actually late 2007 when we got started. And then we had a plumbing leak in mid 2010 that destroyed the whole beam shovel part of the layout, and a whole bunch of other things in the house. And so the area was rebuilt, but to a different configuration by 2015. And then the layout was dismantled in 2017 due to a move. So here was as far as we got. So this area in the upper right-hand corner, that was the part that was destroyed by the flood. There was some minor damage to the rest of the layout, but nothing insurmountable. This part, the benchwork warped. So basically, this was the track that was in place at the time of the flood. And as I said, this whole area in here was rebuilt, and there were plans to extend down this way, which just never did happen. I was just starting to look at that when it was decided that we were going to move. So just some pictures of it. So this is what we called east staging, and the roundhouse area. The caboose track, always good to have a good caboose track. This one was even double-ended. This was the main yard in Prince Albert. We weren't running passenger trains, but this track was designated in my design as coach storage. So just to keep people from using it, I would park a passenger train on there. Okay, this is the Pabco pulp mill. Those of you who are LD SIG members, there was an article on this particular part of the layout in the LD journal at one point. This is the town of Buckland, and Crutwell, Holbein. This area actually, this is the part that we had the major damage to. It was actually built almost as a temporary trackage just so I could have enough to operate. And then Shellbrook, and that's the only picture I ever took of that area. that was worth publishing. As you can see, this was sort of a converted storage room, so lots of junk in it. This is a schematic of the layout as it stood. So there was the east staging yard with 4 tracks. There was a 4-track freight yard, 1 double-ended, 2 stub-end, or 2 double-ended, 2 stub-end, and there was an AD track, the coach track, the main track, the boost track, the terminal. South staging was shown as 1 track. There was actually room to put in 4. The other 3 never got put in. The Papco pulp mill was actually on a branch off the main line. And then as we headed west, for some reason, I tend to build my layouts backwards. So I'm always looking south with east to the left and west to the right. Not too sure why I do that. So through the towns of Buckland, Crotwell, Holbein, and Shellbrook. So say the 90% of the track from east staging to Buckland was in place, not including the CPR yard. The CPR yard was there, but it was not connected. It actually survived from the previous layout. The Prince Albert local industries are not in place. There was going to be a fair bit of local industry around the yard, and it wasn't that. Well, some of it was built, but we never used it. The track from Buckland to Shellbrook was seen as temporary, as already mentioned, and the south staging, only 1 of 4 tracks was in place. The future plan was to better space out the towns from Crotwell to Shellbrook, so I was going to move Shellbrook further on down that wall on the right-hand side. And basically move everything else around to space things out better. There was also a future plan to add the town of Meadow Lake on the CPR, which would then allow for CPR trains to run utilizing trackage rights. And there was a future plan to add west staging. In fact, I was just on the verge of adding that at the time of the flood. So the long-term operating goal, so this is where I aspired to be, but I said, we're not going to start here. So there was going to be, CNR was going to be running through freight and passenger trains between the east, west, and south staging. Way freights would be running between Prince Albert and Shellbrook. The CPR would be running freight and passenger trains between east staging and Prince Albert, and then mixed trains between Prince Albert and Meadow Lake. The Papco pulp mill was switched by both CN and CP as for a prototype, and there would be local industry switching in Prince Albert. Initial operating scheme, so said start smaller. So just going to do the CN. And we'd run a through freight between south staging and Prince Albert. We would run the Buckland way freight would run Prince Albert to Holbein and return, and that was way freight 1. The Shellbrook mixed train would run Shellbrook to Prince Albert and return. That was way freight 2. And the pulp mill switcher would run from Prince Albert Yard to the Papco mill and return, way freight 3. And of course, there was also a yard crew. So basically, could actually keep 4 crews busy for about 2.5 hours. So the through freight operated from the south station to Prince Albert and brought cars for the 3 way freights. It was typically 15 to 20 cars long, depending on how many cars were headed for each way freight. The yard crew would bring the through freight into the yard after the Buckland way freight and the pulp mill switcher had departed, although sometimes it came in before the pulp mill. We did a number of variations, and but generally, the yard crew would just move it in from staging, and the yard crew would also return it through freight to staging at the end of the session with the okay. Yeah, and actually started this before the south staging track was added. And I'd actually set up the through freight in the east staging track, and so the engine was on the right, and we back it into the yard, and then we back it out afterwards. And in fact, I think the first session I actually basically just had a through freight sitting on the AD track at the start of the session. Okay, now we're not there. So the Buckland way freight, and here's a key that I learned. So this train was ready to go at the start of the session in the Prince Albert Yard. It was sitting on the arrival departure track. Just needed to add the caboose and the locomotive, and away it could go. It was the job of the yard crew at the previous session, is their last thing to do was to make up that train. And if they didn't, then I would do so before the session. That way, that crew did not have to wait for the yard to do anything. We started the session. Whoever had that train would basically pick up their power from the roundhouse, put it on the front of the train. The yard crew would tack on the caboose, and away they go. That way, someone wasn't waiting for half an hour while the yard figured out how they're going to build the train. So basically, after that, it proceeded along its route. It switched from Buckland, proceeded to Holbein. When it got to Holbein, we had sort of a very crude dispatching method, but they basically had instructions to take the siding of Holbein and wait for the eastward Shellbrook mixed. This was all on an instruction sheet that the crew had. My intention was, and I never did implement it, was that they would actually have a pre-written train order, which would basically tell them to wait at Holbein for the Shellbrook mix. Once the Shellbrook mix departed Holbein, then it switched to town. And it got that work done. That was as far as it went. So they'd run around the train, but then they had to wait for the Shellbrook mix to come back the other way. So the instructions basically said, if you think it's going to be a while, go for coffee. And what was useful for that was where the crew lounge, such as it was situated. The crew could see the Shellbrook mixed heading back, so they would know it was time to go and get ready to move their train. And then once the Shellbrook mixed had gone by, then they proceeded back the other way. And with Crutwell being a trailing point that direction, it was only switched to one way. Buckland being a double-ended business track, usually they put the setouts on the way out and do the pickups on the way back. For each town, I did up a map like this, and these are the actual maps that we used. I created them using my CAD program. But basically, this was attached to either the fascia or the valence, depending what made sense. And it showed the spots and what industries there were, because although some of the structures were there, not all were. And that way they knew how to, where the cars were supposed to go. Crutwell, again, much simpler. And Holbein was not quite as many spots as Buckland, but probably the more complex town, because we also had a passing siding. Okay, the Shellbrook mixed. Again, to get things moving quickly, this train actually originated out in Shellbrook. So the locomotive and the passenger equipment and the caboose were sitting on the siding. It was Canadian National's practice in Western Canada to run cabooses on mixed trains, because mixed trains were operated by freight crews, and the next train they might be going out on might be a freight train, and they would need their caboose. This, of course, would be in the days of assigned cabooses. So that they would originate there, so they make up their train, which meant that they had to go and do all the, pull all the cars that were ready to go from the various industrial spurs, make up the train. They then had to make sure that they parked the combine in front of the station, so they could load passengers and express. And once they got that done, then they would head along to Holbein, and they would wait on the main for the Buckland Way freight, which may or may not be there when they got there. If it wasn't there, then they had to wait. Again, like I said, it's probably the intention was eventually to handle that with train orders, but never quite got to that stage. Okay, so the Shellbrook mix being a passenger train, they also had to make station stops at Crutwell and Buckland. And again, we got to go for coffee. So upon arrival at Prince Albert, the crew goes for coffee while the yard crew works the train. Unfortunately, they couldn't see the yard from the lounge. So sometimes the yard crew had to chase them down and tell them, get off your butts, your train's ready to go, guys. And so anyway, the yard crew would then basically, work the train. Now, if the yard crew was on top of things, it was pretty straightforward, because they already had the outbound freight cars ready to go. They just had to, temporarily find an empty track to shove the inbound freight cars on, and switch around the combine and caboose and turn the power on the turntable. And then basically just reverse back the other way, making the station stops. And again, the Buckland way freight would be usually sitting ready to go in Holbein. And I know there was more than one occasion when the Holbein crew got a little bit impatient, figured they could beat them back to Prince Albert, and we'd have a little meet somewhere where there was no siding. So then when it arrives at Shellbrook, it makes the station stop, spots the freight cars, and parks locomotive, faster equipment, and caboose on the siding. And again, there's a map of Shellbrook, total of 21 spots there. So it could be quite a bit of work to get the train made up, and there's always, not every spot would be full. Usually somewhere between a half and 2/3. And usually about half the cars that were in town were staying there, so they had to work around what was there and get their train made up. And likewise, when they came back to spot things. And then we had the pulp mill switcher. So when we first started, it was originating in Prince Albert after the through freight arrives because it needed cars from the through freight. Although we did do a few sessions where we basically kept the cars from the previous day's through freight in the yard, so it could depart before the through freight got in because all the cars would be there. Once the train was built, it departed for the pulp mill. So this would always be the one train where people had to wait a little bit for the yard to do something. This yard was entirely within yard limits, both on the model and the prototype. So it was basically visual flight rules, so to speak. And basically, it was they went up to the pulp mill, they switched the mill, and they returned to the yard. However, it was definitely a switching puzzle. I saw some people, everyone else would be going home, and the crew would still be there trying to figure it out. So that was the track plan for it. If they had 6 cars, it was easy. If they had 7 or 8 cars, you had to think a bit about it, but most people could get it done. It was possible to do it with 9 cars. Some people couldn't do it. Part of the reason why it was difficult was that there was a rule that you couldn't follow the main line here. So between the points of this switch and the following point here, there's only really room for 1 car in there. It looks longer than that, but there wasn't quite enough room for 2 cars. So that was a complication. You could switch all kinds of cars if you could just keep pushing cars down the main line, but that was frowned upon. Okay, so then the yard crew. So they had to bring in the through freight after the Buckland way freight departed. They had to build the pulp mill switcher. They had to classify the through freight. They had to build the outbound Shellbrook mix. They had to break up the inbound Shellbrook mix, break up the other 2 way freights as they came in, build the outbound through freight, and then move it back to staging. Just a couple of notes now on what happens. Sometimes it got funny. Some people like to operate alone. Some always wanted to operate as a team, and there was the odd time where we'd be short of crew. So for shorter crew, basically we would annul the pulp mill switcher, but to get the cars out of the yard crew's hair, they would basically stick the locomotive on it. They'd run it through the mill, but they wouldn't switch it, and then I would deal with that the next day. And sometimes the through freight didn't leave either, especially if the pulp mill run didn't go, because that was a good chunk of the cars it needed. So there was a few different things we tried. So we did add enhancements as time went on. So the first thing we did is we added an east-west through freight. So what we did was we staged the eastward train on the main track at Shellbrook. Remember that the locomotive and the caboose and combine for the mixed train were sitting on the siding, so we could do it there. There was lots of room in east staging, so we staged the westward train there. So what we would do is that gave the pulp mill switcher crew something to do at the start of the session. So they would, while they were waiting for the yard crew to build their train, they would go and they would run that through freight in from Shelbrook. And at the end of the session to run the westward train, it was sort of whoever was done and ready to go. So usually wouldn't be the Pulp Mill Switcher crew. It actually usually be the Shelbrook mixed crew, sometimes the Buckland Wayfreight crew. If it was the Buckland Wayfreight crew and the Shelbrook guys weren't done, then sometimes they'd have to hold before they went in. That did a number of things. Adding that, like I said, it got that third crew running right away, and it also gave additional sources of traffic. And we later even added a CPR train. So we didn't have the town of Meadow Lake built, so we would stage the eastward train on the main track at the pulp mill, and again the westward train in east staging, and again a very similar procedure to how we ran that east-west through freight. And we did designate one track as an interchange. Actually, that coach track then became the interchange, so the CP crew were allowed to set off and pick up cars there and nowhere else, and then the CN crew yard crew could come in and also access that track. And that also added some interest to it. So most of the as in the prototype, most of the cars coming off that CP line were actually headed to and from the pulp mill. So the conclusions are: start small, have jobs that are ready to go at the start of the session, and add more jobs and complexity as the crews gain experience. And above all else, have fun. So I guess I'm now ready to take questions.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Cal. Let's see. We'll go back through the the notes here. And I threw this in the chat just in case people don't know the term CP, CPR. That's obviously Canadian Pacific or Canadian Pacific Railway officially today. CN, Canadian National. I happen to model CP, so let's see. Dan Cohen asking, novice question, away freight, is that working local yards and industries? And somebody answered, way freights work local industries and may work smaller outlying yards, but is not the same as large yard switching. Do you want to answer that with a way freight, what a way freight is?
Yeah, a way freight, basically, they go to all the small towns along the line and switch whatever cars are necessary. So, maybe only one or two cars a town. The other thing I've discovered on CN is CN would call a train a way freight if it had a way car. Now some railroads way car is caboose. On CN, a way car was a box car with less than carload freight. So at every town, you would have to spot the way car at the station or depot, and between the agent operator and the crew, they would unload any less than carload freight and that was coming to town, load any less than carload freight that was leaving town. We tried that for a while too. We'd actually would add a box car to the Buckland way freight that was designated the way car.
And just to clarify, a way car is not necessarily a caboose.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, on
box
CN,
car or something like that.
Yeah. On CN, it would usually be a box car. Although I can actually remember seeing right towards the end of them doing less than carload freight by train, actually using a surplus baggage car, because by that point in time they weren't running as many passenger trains either. So
got it. All right, let's Kay Travers is asking for, do you have a map of the area that you're modeling? Since it is up there, they may not recognize where things are at.
Yes, I don't know if I can quickly grab it. Yeah, I probably should have included that in the presentation, but Did you want me to see? if I can-
Where would it be? I mean, are we modeling? As I can bring up.
Okay, in northern Saskatchewan.
Okay.
So figure 1,000 miles straight north of Denver.
Okay, so I'm on Saskatoon. How much further?
Oh, about another 90 miles north.
Okay. So is there a particular, I didn't remember what the town was.
Okay,
there.
well, the yard was the Prince Albert yard.
Okay. See if I can find it here.
Yeah, just follow Highway 11 north out of Saskatoon.
I found a Prince Albert apparently. Is
Yeah.
that where we're?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I see the yard. Right in downtown, it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, what's left of it. Roundhouse is still standing. Yeah.
So this is Prince Albert.
Yes. And then I was operating, if you follow along Highway 3, you can see Shellbrook.
Yep.
Yeah, actually Buckland, Cretwell, Holbein all show up there.
What's that?
I said all the towns show up.
Okay.
Shellbrook is the only one that was close to what was there. The others I expanded beyond what they are.
Sure. Yeah, let's see if we can get a ridiculous zoom here. Let's see, anybody taking photos? Yeah. I can kind of still see pictures there.
Yeah, no, the roundhouse is still standing, and I understand that Carlton Trail, the short line that runs the line now, is still using some of the stalls to store locomotives.
Very cool. Let me stop sharing here. All right, let's see. Back through the questions. We got that one answered. What do you use for car forwarding? You're using car cards, waybills, switch lists. Do your crews have a preference?
I was using car cards and waybills.
Okay. And I think this is similar, but a little bit different. What type of documents and paperwork do your crews use? How do you, you got that part, but the second part is how do you communicate rules such as not fouling the main at the pulp mill?
Each train had a train instruction sheet.
Okay.
And it would explain whatever I thought was important. So
got it. All right, let's see. Same question again. Then there is Mark. Yeah, there's a way, W-A-Y car, and then there's a way car, W-E-I-G-H. So
yes.
two different kinds of weighing. I think those are typically called scale cars. At least that's how I've seen them called. I'm sure there's 100 different names for them, but
yeah, well, I think he's referring to a car that needs to be weighed.
Yeah.
As opposed to the,
oh, okay, never mind. I
car.
misread what he wrote. So, all right. Okay, well, we're through the questions there. Let me flip this off. And other people have questions, I've given you the ability to unmute yourself and ask your question. So what else would you like to know from Cal?
Cal, does your mixes use coaches, combines, just strictly cabooses?
Well, the intention was to use a combine, which I use sometimes, although I also would use a baggage car and a coach. Apparently there was some I don't know if it was a CN rule or a Canadian government rule, but CN refused to allow passengers into the caboose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it actually was one of the last mixed trains to run, and someone pointed out that the seats in the caboose look much better than the seats in the combine, so why couldn't they ride there?
You said they didn't allow passenger trains to have cabooses? Is that what you said?
No, they didn't allow passengers to ride in cabooses.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Because if they get, if they ride in the caboose, you can sit up in the cupola and you can have coffee with the crew and you might actually enjoy the trip. And then they might not be able to discontinue the train.
Makes sense. All right, who else has questions for Cal?
Hi, Cal. I'm wondering, what did you do prior to the first operating session on your own? Did you test out all your plans, or did you just kind of write up sheets and hope it worked, or what was your process there? Thanks.
I ran each of the way freights by myself individually, and more than once. I actually set up sort of even ran the session sort of as a sort of one train at a time, just to see if the yard could handle the cars coming in and out, and see how long it would take to switch some of the towns, what things I haven't thought about yet. So yeah, I learned from the first time, you don't just develop the scheme and say, okay, let's run trains. So
Thank you.
Yeah, every scheme needs a little test flying, and you very quickly, I mean, what we recommend, I've seen it called a bunch of different things, like having a tiger team, where like if you're in a division or a region where you've got some, experienced operators who are willing to help new railroads get operating, who aren't going to be just viciously critical, more constructive criticism, to say, okay, we've done this type of operation a bunch of different places, let's see how things go, and make genuine suggestions to make it a better operating session, right? Because we want more railroads operating. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it really adds something once you get bored with roundy. But you got to have some help to get started, because there's a lot of, even as I fumbled around getting mine started, just as simple as it is, it's like, okay, there's stuff that people have suggested that even I didn't think of. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess I need to figure that out. So
yeah, I didn't do it with this one, but the previous one, after we had the first disaster, I then a number of times I just invite one other person over and we would try running some trains and seeing if they understood my instructions.
Yep. My system is set up, it's the car order system that we've talked about here a few times, and I can actually run it myself. Now, granted, I haven't been doing that lately, but the idea of saying, okay, if I'm, making sure that we're moving cars in a logical manner, not getting overloaded, you can, it's easy to tell that, okay, hold on, this doesn't work here, I need to rework this. So got a few more questions. Victor, this was just Google Maps, but I zoomed in and used the street view images to see the side of the roundhouse. Let's see, another question. What is the prize job for experienced operators, and what is the job you give new folks who are operating in your railroad?
Probably the hard to say whether it would be the yard or the pulp mill switcher as the prize job. The other two, I suppose in some ways the mixed train was the simplest one, because you only had to switch one town.
Yep.
But they were both, similar amount of skill.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I know personally, if I go to a brand new layout, one of the things I'd like to do is get on get on a like a way freight or a run through train where I'm going to get to see most of the layout. I mean, that's, you kind of get an idea of where things are at, and then the next train can be, oh, okay, now I'll go switch this location, or it's, and then you can kind of ramp up from the, okay, the run, you know, staging to staging, no stops, moving up to, okay, you're going to make some stops, some minor switching. Then you're up into, okay, no, I'm just going to switch this little local. And then you get somewhere like one of the layouts here in town that Brad Rodert has with this just insane industrial district. It's like, okay, he actually went through and like ranked them in difficulty. And that particular one was like a 10 out of 10, because it's so many cars, there's time constraints and so on. So.
Yeah, I saw one guy thought they should do on ski runs, you know, Black Diamond.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that would be good. Double Black Diamond. Just you're new. No, this is not for you.
Yeah, one of my friends had discussed doing that. So
yeah, let's see. Tom Ciara, sorry if I'm screwing your name up, Ciara. Cal, over the course of a typical operating session, how many car movements are generated?
well, typically we had, like I said, 15 to 20 cars would come on and off the layout, and then there also were there were some movements which were between two industries on the layout. Mainly, I did have a sawmill as well as the pulp mill. There's a sawmill in Shellbrook, so that the wood chips would be coming in, and then we also were running some pulpwood off that spur at Crotwell. So there probably would be, I think I had about 60 cars on the layout, and probably about 40 of them would move in any given session.
So you're getting a good rotation session to session then.
Yeah. Well, I think if you saw that one picture of staging, it showed two trains in there, and part of that was that there'd usually be another train sitting in staging of some extra cars. But yeah, usually I would say about 2/3 of the cars would move in a given session. So.
Okay. All right. What other questions? Nothing else? Okay. Well, Cal, want to thank you for presenting today. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. Do you have a website for your layout or anything where people can see more about it?
No, I don't.
Okay.
People keep telling me I should. There's a few people I send out updates. Of course, you know, as I say, moved in 2017, so now working on a different layout. Although a lot of the, you know, similar modeling a similar area, although different, focusing on different things.
Sure. And by the way, I have actually been to Saskatchewan, so I think we went through. Does Trans-Canada go through Saskatoon?
Yeah, the Canadian goes.
Yep. Yeah, so I've been through there. So
yeah,
or the Trans-Canada Highway. But
Trans-Canada Highway is further south. It's through Regina.
Okay. All right. Well, I will go ahead. Yeah, I'll go ahead and open it up. If people have other questions, not necessarily about Cal's railroad, but if you have other operations questions, we'll leave this open for a little bit. And if not, you obviously feel free to drop off. We'll have the replay up later tonight. The OPSIG page with all of the past meetups has been updated now. We've now got the 2020 virtual meetups, the 2021 virtual meetups, and now the 2022 virtual meetups. So had quite a few. We're still getting, like I said, it's been great. I know a lot of people can't, you know, no matter what time you pick, not everybody's going to make it, but I'm happy to see how many replays we've been getting. I mean, we're well into the tens of thousands of replays, which is great. I think Bruce let's see, Bruce Morden still wins the prize. He and Matt Thompson did a session last January that has the most replays of 1,702. So people really like that one apparently. So that's great.
I have a question. So I'm located in a major city in the United States, and I imagine you're in Cal, in a somewhat sparsely populated area. And so I wonder how you located operators.
Well, I will plug my the site I was mentioning earlier, operatingsessions.com. The whole idea behind that was to, I mean, it started as a registration system for an operations event, and through a very long evening, it turned into something much bigger. Leaving out the minor issue with the email, one of the places you can do is basically put your layout up there and create events. You know, if you're allowing people to come in sort of an open enrollment, that's one way to do it. Obviously, your local division of NMRA is a good place to participate. Typically, I know, like I'm the coordinator here in Central Indiana for operations. So we're doing operating sessions for our upcoming regional conference called Indy Junction. So I'm coordinating those. I mean, at least the bottom of your thing says Baltimore. I mean, that's certainly a fairly populated area, but like I said, I don't personally know how many places do operations out there. Let me take a quick look here and see. So right now I've got two. Let me share this real quick. So there's I don't know where Rising Sun, Maryland is. Frederick, I know where that's at. That's out west. I believe that's out west of Baltimore. So
Yeah, both of those are correct. It's surprising that I've lived in different parts of the country, and I had assumed that there'd be a lot of
hey, Arthur.
Yeah.
Sorry, you may want to turn your video off. It's reporting that you've got really low bandwidth.
Yeah.
Can you say what you said again?
Yeah. So as you noted, these ones on your list are quite a distance from the metropolitan area of Baltimore.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised at how few operators, people that are interested in operations, there are in the Baltimore, Maryland.
Well, there are also others. This is on the OPSIG site. So if you're a member of OPSIG in the railroad directory, obviously it looks kind of familiar from operating sessions. I stole a lot of the code. Here's one in Huntingtown and Catonsville. Not sure where those are in relation to Baltimore off the top of my head.
Eatonsville is me, and I'm probably about 10 miles from Baltimore.
Well, there you go. So you know how you find operators? You come to the OPSIG virtual meetup and you ask. So let's see. If we look at Virginia, there's some in Virginia. I mean, these are further south: Chesapeake, Charlottesville, Gainesville. I don't think we've got any DC. We've got Sweden. That's probably a hike for you. Saskatoon. Well, here's Cal's. So Cal needs to add some photos, but I think Cal's still building. But yeah, so the OPSIG directory, people will list layouts up there. The one thing that isn't up here right now is a way to say, hey, there's an event calendar. If we go down here to Maryland, there's nothing in Maryland. The other thing I would look at is, I don't know what NMRA region division you're in, but typically they're going to have operating sessions. Most conventions will have at least a few. That would be a good place to go, especially if it's near Baltimore, and go recruit people. Because you might get some, typically the regionals, you're gonna get a lot more locals than you're gonna get people from out of state. So. Anybody else from the Baltimore area who wants to volunteer to run on Arthur's layout?
I'd be up for it. I'm in the process of building mine. We've been dealing with some family issues over the last month. And so I've been kind of delaying, and I know I've got at least one person on this list that I gotta get in touch with. So Arthur, I'm definitely interested. And I am also just finishing up negotiations. I'm buying Tennessee Valley custom models out of Tennessee. So retirement is getting busier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, it tends to be a lot of word of mouth, which is good and bad. You know, if you're new to an area, finding, I mean, you could talk to, I don't know if there are any railroad clubs left up there. You know, there's obviously the big, what's the name of the big show there up in Maryland?
The scale show.
Is that what it's called? Okay.
Yeah. In Huntsville.
Yeah, up in at the state fairgrounds up in
It's
Timonium.
Timonium, that's it. I lived in Virginia.
Timonium, about 15 miles north of
Yep.
Baltimore.
Yeah, so that might be another place to go to look at the, you know, see what clubs are around, see if, you know, there might be module groups where people know, you know, oh yeah, well, so-and-so has a layout. But like I said, those were kind of the places I would start with personally. Trevor,
Arthur,
go ahead.
Arthur, I didn't understand the question. Are you looking for people to operate on your layout, or are you looking for layouts to operate on?
I've been a regular operator at several layouts, but and currently my home layout has just been torn down because I moved, so I'm not in the position to offer now. But I have been on, I'm a member of several clubs, have been on a regional convention as an operating layout, and nobody came, nobody signed up. I'm not sure what the problem is. It may have been partly that I'm an N scale, and I think there's an assumption that N scale layouts aren't real train layouts and don't operate. But mine was a fully operational, fully scenic. So I think it just surprised me. So there's all the ideas that were suggested are very good ones, somehow the Baltimore area hasn't generated the number of operating layouts that there ought to be in a metropolitan area that size.
Well, and again, they may be out there and they just, it tends to be very, very private. You know, you can't get in, you know, it's like the first rule of Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club, right? First rule of operating sessions is we don't, you kind of have to work your way in. And so looking for those regional events where you can find out about layouts, and, you know, as long as you don't break something, if you happen to live there, that's the way you can meet people. I mean, it's unfortunate, but you know, when people are in their homes, a lot of them are not really overly willing to just let anybody in. So that's part of the fun. But
Eric, there is a group called the East Coast Santa Fe Modelers that are in the Philadelphia area. I've spoken at a couple of their weekend conventions, and the last one that I was supposed to go to was canceled because of COVID, and it was to be in Wilmington.
Oh, Wilmington, Delaware.
Yeah, so that's close by, and so there's a number of Santa Fe operators that are in that general area. They have a Facebook page, and he might contact the East Coast Santa Fe modelers to see if there's any in the Baltimore area.
Yep. All right. Does that give you some help, Arthur?
Yeah, good. They're all good suggestions, and I just need to keep at it.
Yeah.
If you're willing to look at larger scale, there is a group that operates in O gauge, called National Capital Trackers, and they have modular layouts that they build and run at all sorts of venues in the Washington, Virginia, Maryland area. They've actually set up before at the B&O Museum in Baltimore. Looking at the website right now, they have about a dozen sessions already planned for 2022, all over the area, from as far south as Fairfax or the Quantico Marine Base up to Baltimore and points in between.
Chuck, do you have a website address for that?
Yes, it's nattrackers.org. Bring that up.
Is this the one? National Capital Trackers?
That's it.
All right. So, yeah, there's a Kensington, Maryland. Springfield, that's where I used to live. So,
Yeah, I several years ago, I participated as an engineer. My brother was a member of the group at the time, and they set up in Fairfax. And somebody actually brought along several cameras, and they were streaming it live on the internet. And my brother was not paying attention, and he went through a 90-degree crossing where he did not have superior position, and he T-boned my train live on camera. And they started getting text messages onto the site within 5 minutes from all over the country of people who witnessed it.
anything from the NTSB?
No, but they were having both of us take a urine test.
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
And it's the video is still out on the internet somewhere. I don't know the URL, but you can probably find it. That was done in Fairfax, Virginia, and it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
That's
National
hilarious.
Capital Trackers, Fairfax.
Yeah. So I'll throw this link into the chat. Yeah, and there's I guess a little plug for op sessions. Steve Hemmel says he got in touch with 2 operating layouts in Florida through OpSig and going on an op session Tuesday in South Carolina. So on a trip back to Missouri, which seems like a really long way, but okay. But yeah, that's the whole idea. There's a couple more links. FCSME, 4-County Society of Model Engineers. So they seem to be, I don't know where they're at. Where are they at? Which
They're
4
in
counties?
Central Maryland.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go. Carroll, Howard, Frederick, and Montgomery County. So a little bit further south towards DC, but where's Carroll County? I don't know where that one's at.
Yep, just west of. This group
That's
has
real close also, a little bit northeast.
Okay. So yeah, just make sure you grab those links out of the chat. So. All right. Any other questions, comments, anything from anybody?
Yeah, I'll bring up something in the Seattle area.
Yep.
We have OpSig, well, not OpSig, but Sound Rails 2022 this coming weekend. I think there's one person on this chat right now that will be in at the Boeing Employees Model Railroad Club operation on Friday.
I will be there.
Yeah. Well, it looks like there are 2 or 3. So anyway, yeah, it's a 3-day session. I think we're maxed out at 53 people for 13 layouts.
That's great. That's
Our
great.
club's the only club participating in it.
Yep, and there's let's see. I just saw some photos from Dale Baker. I don't know if he's on or not. They're doing their trying to remember what the division, it's like the Indian Nations division. They're doing that this current weekend. Rocky Op is coming up at the end of April out in Denver. Trying to remember what else. Obviously, if you have an event you'd like to publicize, we do keep those on the OPSIG event calendar. If you're a member, you can see that. If you're not a member, you should join. It's only $10 a year for digital copy. Rocky Op is over full. Okay, well, that's I think we're seeing a lot of pent up demand. I know when, at least for the Indie Junction event, when we opened that up last week, we had more than well over 50% of the slots full within 24 hours. And we're down to over 90% full at this point. So it's great to see. Okay. Well, if anybody else has anything, feel free to say it. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and shut this call down and see everybody next month. Again, this will be the week after Easter, so April 24th. I'm getting a lot of feedback, so. But otherwise, thanks for attending, and we'll see you next month.